Good evening. Hello everyone. I'd like you to take a seat. I'm going to get started in a minute, just letting the last couple of people come in and we'll shut the doors. Thanks so much for coming out this evening while it's raining. My name's Nicole Dennis. I'm the Director of Cobalt Engagement. I'm here to facilitate tonight on behalf of Council. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which we meet today, the Gadigal and the Wangal people, and pay our respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to introduce a couple of key people from Council who are here today to explain the proposed planning changes. We've got Simone Plummer here, the Director of Planning, and we've also got Daniel East, the Manager of Planning, who put a lot of work into this proposal. So they're here today to explain the detail of what's been put into this planning proposal. A couple of ground rules. Everyone's adults. A lot of this we don't have to say, but sometimes people come to these sessions who might be quite passionate about the issues that we're discussing. So please listen to people. Please don't speak when someone else is speaking, and we will have time to listen to all of your questions. So please raise a hand and we will get to you. Sorry, we started a couple minutes late, just waiting for a couple of people to come, but we will end on time. And I'd just also like to remind people that we won't be sharing this with the media. However, we will be recording this session and putting it on Council's website for those who could not attend, but we won't be recording the Q&A. So your voices will not be recorded, just this technical presentation. A couple of housekeeping things. There's an accessible bathroom just out there to the left of the cafe, and in a case of emergency, the emergency exit is right here. So the purpose of this evening is to provide information on what's being proposed. It's to provide you with an opportunity to ask questions to help you write an informed submission. Council will be taking notes today. However, the most important way that you can contribute is to write a written submission. That's due on the 17th of December. We will be holding more drop-in sessions Saturday morning if you have some other neighbours or people who are interested in this proposal. The first one this Saturday will be in this venue from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, and the next two Saturdays will be at Leichhardt Town Hall. So we've got a couple of other workshops coming up next week for the other precincts, and this evening is for the Kings Bay precinct. So if there's any questions that Council can't answer tonight that might be quite technical, we'll follow up to everyone who's been recorded with a written response, and that'll be shared with everyone. Okay, so I'd like to hand over now to Daniel East, Manager of Planning. Go, Daniel.
Thank you, Nicole. So I'm going to take you through the history of the Parramatta Road Corridor, because it does have quite a long history, and take you through some of the context and also how we got here, what is happening now in terms of Council's planning controls. So I'll be covering what the planning proposal is and what it is not, and then also some of the detailed planning controls after that. So some of you may have been involved in previous consultation sessions that were developed by the state government, and that was quite a long time ago now. That was 10 years ago. In 2013, there was initial consultation by the state government for the entire corridor that traverses from Camperdown to Granville in the west. That was adopted by the state government as a state-endorsed strategy in 2016 in November. And in planning speak, that means it's a ministerial direction. We as a council need to be acknowledging that state-endorsed policy. You can see the acronym there as well, PR Cuts. That stands for the Parramatta Road Corridor Urban Transformation Strategy, which is the state government's name for this redevelopment area. So the PR Cuts precincts within the Inner West area, there are 4 of them. One of them is Camperdown, and that's part of a separate project. But the 3 that we are proposing at the moment is Leichhardt, Taverners Hill, and Kins Bay in the west. The focus of this meeting is, of course, around Kins Bay, which is in the suburb of Croydon. So how did we get here? There's been a whole suite of strategies, both state and local, to inform this planning proposal. But I do want to draw your attention in particular to the right-hand side of the slides. They are the ones that we are proposing as a council, and there's a huge amount of technical studies that have been involved to understand what can and cannot work in this precinct. So we've done some analysis of the potential flooding impacts, traffic and transport impacts, contamination, economic assessments, aircraft noise, urban design, and that's what we are required to do through the state-endorsed strategy, which is why there are so many documents that we are exhibiting at this point in time. Just going into a little bit more detail about the 3 precincts, and then we'll focus on Kins Bay. But Leichhardt precinct is centred, you can see the dotted line is the overall development corridor from the state-endorsed strategy. The shaded areas are the areas that we are proposing up front as part of what we are calling the stage 1 of the proposal. So for the Leichhardt precinct, we are envisaging 700 dwellings and 1,300 jobs, and that will be centred around Norton Street and Crystal Street in Leichhardt. The second precinct is Taverners Hill, about 400 dwellings, no jobs, so just purely residential. And that's centred around the light rail station, and down the bottom of the map is Lewisham train station, so existing areas of public transport. And then finally, Kins Bay, 400 dwellings and about 566 jobs, and that's in the western part of our LGA on the border with Canada Bay and Burwood Council. So what our vision and the state government's vision is to create a precinct that has a high quality of life for any future residents that will be living there. That is centred around access to public transport, connecting community through social engagement, but also we have done some heritage analysis as well, so there are additional heritage items and heritage conservation areas, along with some affordable housing centred in Leichhardt. And also the new buildings will be a benchmark in terms of water and energy efficiency. So the planning proposal is seeking to create increased density in these locations, as I mentioned, to facilitate additional jobs and growth. And that is to create extra housing supply in a constrained market to deal with additional demand. And as I mentioned, there's additional heritage items and also greater density. Most planning proposals that councils propose in Sydney generally just change the planning controls to allow increased density. We have created an innovative approach to these planning controls whereby they won't change unless a developer comes to council and can prove that they can do certain things. So they would need to prove that it's a high quality building design. We have a design review panel that will be assessing those buildings. And also active street frontages where appropriate in town centres. On top of that, additional energy and water saving standards that are beyond the state controls that apply throughout New South Wales, and also other other targets around deep soil, so tree planting targets that are above what you normally expect to deal with urban heat island effects, and also some affordable housing, so 2% of any new development in Leichhardt would be attributed to affordable housing. What the planning proposal will not do, and I have to be clear about this, this is not WestConnect's. Council is not in the business of acquiring land to develop sites. What we can do, and our role is to create planning controls that encourage development. So landowners might think it's an opportune time to make changes or sell, and that's the opportunity that the land would change over and change in accordance with the planning controls. So I just want to make that point and dispel any potential myths or concerns in that regard. In terms of property rates, that's been another concern potentially from residents. There are provisions under the Local Government Act that restricts the increases of potential property rates, and that would only, the additional rates would only occur once the properties are sold rather than increasing immediately. And then we've been having a huge focus on maintaining mature trees and having a tree canopy. So there are controls in our LEP and DCP that focus on retaining the tree canopy cover that we've got, so retaining significant trees where there are existing there, and then also encouraging areas to allow more trees in the future once that development occurs as well. And then also, I have to say, at the DA stage, that will be the next stage. If these planning controls go through, that's when these more micro impacts would be then assessed again by the council. Just a little bit more detail about the sustainability provisions that any new developments in this area would be required to meet. Additional, as I said, energy and water targets and tree canopy cover requirements to create better development in the inner west. End of trip facilities, that means spaces for people to have a shower if they've been riding to home or to work. And also additional controls to encourage green walls and green roofs and solar panels on roofs, because really that's where we're heading as a society. And also electric vehicle charging facilities, because more people will be driving electric cars in the future as well. There are changes to some of the parking provisions. That relates to trying to reduce potential traffic congestion, but we have tried to focus on developing areas that have existing good public transport to encourage people not to use their cars as sites are redeveloped. There are different changes in the plan controls around what's called decoupling car parking. So that's whereby units could be sold with car parking or without car parking. And that would reduce the housing affordability of some of those units that don't have car parking, because we know car parks are quite expensive and can be up to $100,000 just by themselves. And then also what we are looking to do as a council is to focus on doing parking permits in the surrounding areas so that the existing residents are able to park as they do at the moment in their streets. And lastly, this is the last slide that I will be doing. There are affordable housing provisions. This does relate only to Leichhardt, not to the Kings Bay area. But in any new development, those developments will be required to give 2% of the floor space to council, where we would then manage the affordable housing units through an affordable housing provider who's accredited at below market rates to support people that need to live in the area but cannot afford to. So I'm going to hand over now to Simon Plummer, Director of Planning, who will take you through the specific Kings Bay planning controls.
Thanks, Daniel. So the slide we have up here is really just to show you the extent of the precinct that's under consideration. It includes the inner west portion of that Kings Bay Croydon precinct, which basically runs between Lang Street and Croydon Road, Parramatta Road and Dalmar Street, and includes that portion of Byron and Scott Street between Parramatta Road and Dalmar Street. The precinct is about providing new residential and employment opportunities close to the future 5 Dock Metro Station, which is about 800 metres from that station, as well as improve public transport on Parramatta Road that the state government says will follow. And we appreciate that that hasn't materialised yet, but that's a role for council and council's advocacy. Sites in the east of the precinct were investigated but excluded because they're already built to their maximum potential, and additional existing employment zone sites were also explored along West Street but excluded for a similar reason. The planning proposal has the capacity or the potential to deliver over 400 new homes for close to 800 new residents and between 500 and 600 new jobs within the precinct. Currently, the sites fronting Parramatta Road are zoned for business and commerce, and the sites fronting Dalmar Street are zoned for low-density residential. With the redevelopment of the precinct comes the opportunity to realise a range of community benefits for future residents of the precinct and those in the surrounding homes. As sites are purchased from existing owners by developers, there's an opportunity to transform the precinct to provide livability outcomes for residents that don't currently exist, such as improved walkability and pedestrian connections between Dalmar and Parramatta Road, and a more inviting streetscape along this section of Parramatta Road. So what does change look like? The Parramatta Road employment area, which is shown in blue, currently has building heights capped at between 8.5 metres for the odd scattered residential dwelling and 15 metres depending on where they sit. Going forward, they'll be permitted up to 4 stories. For those properties along Dalmar Street, shown in pink, it's proposed for those to be rezoned from low density to medium density residential, and this will permit residential flat buildings. Currently, the building height is capped at 8.5, but under this proposal, 3 stories will be permitted. There are also some opportunity sites adjacent to Croydon Road which have the potential to accommodate extra building height due to their proximity to the future 5 Dock Metro Station. The purple will allow 5 stories and the yellow will allow 4 stories. And this is what the future land use map will look like, showing the E3 productivity support zone adjacent to Parramatta Road and the R3 medium density zone for Dalmar Street properties. We've included a few slides here that just give you some indicative lot amalgamation patterns. And so it's important to understand what lot amalgamation means because it sets and manages expectations going forward about how properties might be combined in order to provide the opportunity for future larger scale development. And so this shows the amalgamation or a preferred lot amalgamation pattern for the residential dwellings fronting Dalmar Street. It promotes orderly redevelopment, it helps set and manage expectations, And there are other controls that also govern future lot sizes, such as minimum lot size of 720 metres squared with minimum street frontages of 20 metres. We've also have controls that ensure that lots aren't orphaned or isolated from future redevelopment, and that they achieve landscape areas and communal space, open space, have setbacks, appropriate vehicular access, and other fundamental controls that provide good urban amenity outcomes. Just very quickly, this is the proposed controls for Parramatta Road and also for Croydon Road. This is a massing model. They're very ugly and they don't give you an indication of what it's going to look like as a pedestrian or a resident on the ground. What these massing models do, though, is they provide a helpful indication of the scale of development that will be possible under the incentive height and floor space controls. So the white fronting Delmar Street is 3-storey residential development, and the pale blue wash fronting Parramatta Road is the 4-storey residential and commercial business mix. This gives you a sense of how the setbacks will be applied. It lets you see the distances between the rear of the buildings on Parramatta Road and Delmar, and also gives you a sense of scale of the front setback of the new buildings that front Delmar Street. And so it gives you an indication of how we're going to achieve the deep soil planting and tree canopy controls and requirements that we've set. This is an artist's rendition of what some of these dwellings would look like. So it's a bit more interesting and gives you a bit more sense of what the amenity is likely to be, more than the massing models, because they show a bit more clearly what the potential outcomes will be. So this is Delmar Street looking east at the intersection with Scott Street, where 3-storey residential flat buildings will be permissible, and gives you that good sense of architectural features and treatments, and good opportunities for landscaping and street tree planting, and how it creates interesting and livable neighbourhoods. Similarly, this is the Croydon Road, Parramatta Road intersection, and this gives you a bit more of an understanding of, with treatment and architectural features, what that 4-storey development could look like. Sorry, it's 5-storey at this intersection. And finally, the Development Control Plan, which is a really critical document that accompanies the planning proposal, because it sets out in a little more detail the expectations that council will have about what a development proposal going forward under the scheme will need to look like in order to achieve development approval. For example, the tree planting requirements, the increase on reliance on solar, and other general objectives that we expect from high-performing buildings that reduce urban heat, that control a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, manage better water use, electrification of activities, of utilities, and include the opportunity for charging for EV vehicles. So this really ends our presentation. And if we haven't answered your questions, we actually have some questions that people provided to us when they registered. So if your question is here and you would like a specific answer to it, we can provide it. Otherwise, I think at this point, we open the floor to general questions or specific questions from you. Yes.